Hello there, Lunar Squadron, and welcome back to the channel. A few days ago, we put out a poll asking you guys, would you want a brand new Star Wars multiplayer game in the style of, say, a Battlefront 3 or that type of game? And the result of that poll was overwhelmingly in support of a new multiplayer game in the Star Wars universe. And today, we want to sit down and talk about what we believe to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest problems when it comes to Star Wars gaming, and that is the lack of a new multiplayer game like Battlefront. And the reason that we want to have this conversation right now is it's just been something that we've wanted to talk about for a very long time. And now that things have kind of slowed down in the gaming industry as we approach the holidays and there's not a whole lot of news going on out there, we believe this is a perfect time to actually take a step back and have this conversation. But before we do that, if you're new to the channel, we would love to have you as always, and the way to do that, just go down below this video, hit that little subscribe button, the bell notification right on next to it. It will notify you every single time that Andreas and I upload the latest and greatest Star Wars, Marvel, just gaming content in general. We really do appreciate all of the support from you guys recently on all of the content on the channel. Now with that out of the way, Andreas, let's talk about the multiplayer side of Star Wars gaming.
Oh yeah, let's do this, guys. This is a discussion that we've been wanting to have for a very long time. Nick and I used to frequently play Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2, both the original variants and the recent variants out of DICE, and we just feel like there is a massive hole in the Star Wars gaming space as of late. And I want to be very careful by the way that I describe this hole, because I am, on the one hand, very thankful and very appreciative of the single-player experiences that we've had recently. And I love those experiences, and I want to keep having great single-player experiences in Star Wars gaming. But on the other hand, Nick, I also really want a multiplayer experience that is replayable, that I can play with friends, and I don't feel like I should have to choose between these two different experiences, because whenever I talk about wanting a Star Wars game that is multiplayer, I feel like the backlash that I often get is anti-multiplayer, is one that believes that multiplayer comes at the cost of single-player games, and I really don't think that has to be the case. I think in a perfect world, we have both. And both are good quality, and I'm feeling like while we are getting those single-player experiences, and we have single-player experiences to look forward to, we have Outlaws, there's going to be a Jedi 3 coming out of Respawn. Respawn's working on a single-player FPS game. We know that there are going to be outstanding single-player experiences coming from these studios. But what of multiplayer? Where's the plan? What's the roadmap? The short answer is there is none.
No, there's not officially yet at the moment. And I think it's important here to start off this conversation like you're doing by kind of setting the record straight as to why we feel this is such a big problem and just kind of like our expectations that we would have for a multiplayer experience. You know, guys, we've been covering Star Wars games now on this channel for years, and it really feels like this is a sentiment that we've had for years now about we really feel that the Star Wars gaming universe, that sphere of gaming, is really missing out on a lot of potential by not having an active multiplayer experience on the level of Star Wars Battlefront 2. I mean, just think about, let's start off with this. Think about since the head got cut off of Battlefront 2 those years back, all of the projects, Disney Plus had not really got off the ground yet. Think about all of the Star Wars projects that have released over the last few years that just don't exist in the gaming sphere like they did, you know, when The Last Jedi was coming out and Rise of Skywalker came out, and those things were able to be put into Battlefront 2 for us to enjoy. Think about it. We have not seen The Mandalorian in gaming, Ahsoka, Andor, Book of Boba Fett. All of these shows and experiences that have come out over the last few years, there is no game to support that content and a way to further interact with this Star Wars IP in that regard. And that's honestly something that I think is a huge miss in the Star Wars gaming sphere. Now, I want to talk about kind of what we would expect from a multiplayer experience, because Andres, like you said, whenever we have discussed our desire for multiplayer, it always comes with what feels like people have a negative connotation towards this. Like multiplayer just carries that around with it, when it's for good reason sometimes, because multiplayer experiences are more likely to have more of those anti-consumer, very toxic elements to them, you know, the loot boxes and the pay to win and pay to play and all of that stuff. However, I don't think just because a game is a multiplayer game means that it absolutely is going to have or has to have those. And I want to set the record straight that we are not advocating for a multiplayer experience that has those features when we say we want multiplayer. Because when we said, hey, it would be really cool to have multiplayer in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, the outlash that came from that was like, how could you possibly want that? That would just be totally anti-consumer. It doesn't make any sense. But all we were saying was, it would be really cool for Andreas and I, where, you know, we live in different places. We live thousands of miles apart, to be able to play that game co-op together at the same time, like we were playing couch co-op, but on an online capacity. It would be cool to just have a multiplayer experience to play with friends beyond just Star Wars Battlefront 2 that is now, 6 years old? And while that is a game that is a ton of fun, I love Battlefront 2. Andreas and I play it all the time. Hell, we played it this week. It is such a fun experience. It's a little annoying and it's a little tiring that that's all we have, especially when, you know, we're level capped in Battlefront 2. There's no new content coming for that game. It's been the same game for years now, and it gets a little stale. It feels like at this point we're just playing that game for leaderboard positioning. We're really not working towards anything. We're not grinding new content. We're not getting new content. It's just starting to get really stale, and it feels like the time is quickly approaching that we need something to replace that experience that is alive and is evolving in the moment and with the new Star Wars content that is coming. And I want to make another thing clear, Andreas. You made this point. We are not advocating for a multiplayer experience to replace these single-player experiences. I don't think it's that black or white. I don't think it has to be a single-player game or it has to be a multiplayer game. In a perfect world, we're getting more single-player experiences and we're getting more multiplayer experiences. We're getting the best of both worlds because they offer different things to the player base. It would offer so much more variety. And a big reason that I think this is such a problem with Star Wars gaming is if you take a look at the current landscape of how projects are coming out, we're getting a new single-player Star Wars game, and I'm really appreciative that we're still getting Star Wars games, but we're getting one every, let's say 3 to 5 years. Like, that was kind of the time span between Fallen Order, then to LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, and then, it was only a year or so to Jedi Survivor, but then Outlaws now is going to be closer to 2 to 3 years removed from that, and we don't have an exact timeline as to when the other Respawn projects will be coming, but between that, there's all of this dead space. And I think that's a problem because the Star Wars IP kind of just drops off the face of the world in the gaming sphere when that happens. But if you have a multiplayer experience that has live content updates like Battlefront 2 did, and then you can frame seasons or content around projects that are releasing on Disney Plus or films that Lucasfilm is releasing, that would be a great way to keep the community involved with the Star Wars IP, to make it more interactive. Like I said, one of the things that I absolutely loved was, whether or not you loved The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker, I thought it was so cool that, we were all excited and hyped for these movies, and then you go see the movie, and then you could come home and play that content. You could experience that planet again in a new way in the game. You could play with those characters. Like, you could put yourself in the movie the best way you possibly could and experience it again. And I think that is something that Star Wars is severely lacking right now. I really believe that this is one of the biggest problems in Star Wars gaming. Now, there's a lot of problems, and maybe it's not the biggest problem, but I think this is a really big problem that we're seeing with this IP right now.
I totally agree with you, Nick. I do think that this is a big problem, and it turns out that a vast majority of individuals that responded to our poll also agree that they are in need, or at least want, a new Star Wars multiplayer game. 80% of the 2.1 100,000 votes that we received said that they absolutely wanted a new Star Wars game. And I guess this sort of begs the question, what form would that multiplayer game take? And to answer that question, I look at what I want out of a multiplayer experience. And for me, there are really a few main key points that I really need addressed. The first of which is replayability. I need a multiplayer game that has replayability, because at the end of the day, that's ultimately what I need to fill in the gaps between single player games. I, and Nick, I'm sure you follow this as well, love to play a single player game thoroughly, but I don't really like to play single player games over and over again. I might replay a single player game here and then if I love it, but I'm not one to play the same game over and over and over and over again. I play a single player game, I appreciate it for what it is, I put it down, I might pick it up in a few years, but I need something that is constantly replayable, that stays fresh so that it gives me a reason to come back. And I also need a multiplayer game to be a forum for me to play with friends, because that really is something that I find lacking with the single player games as of late. Is I want to play games that I can connect with friends when I am playing them. And that doesn't mean that I need every single game to have a multiplayer co-op component. It just means that I feel like that's lacking in the current slate of Star Wars games. And when I'm thinking about what could be a solution to this problem, I need something that's replayable, and I need something that I can play with friends. Those are really the two problems I have here. What game would fill that mold? For me, and I think for a lot of people, we immediately think to Star Wars Battlefront. And I think when you start to talk about Star Wars Battlefront, Nick, you really get two camps of people. I think there's the camp of people that immediately get what I'm talking about, and they get excited and they want a new Battlefront game. But then I think there's a group of people that see Battlefront and start to think of the toxicity of the initial release of Battlefront 2 with the pay to win and the microtransactions, and they immediately recoil at that. And reading through the comments of our poll, I'm seeing a lot of people who are saying, I would love to see a Battlefront, but I would like to see a limitation on microtransactions. It's actually fascinating to me, Nick, that so many people respond in the same way, going directly to the microtransaction point. And I think there's really a solution staring us all right in the face, and that is, imagine a Battlefront that releases with all of the content we were expecting, with a map lineup that rivals the original Battlefront 2, perhaps even does more, and also does not have that toxic microtransaction component that we all had issues with at the beginning of Battlefront 2. And I think back to the end of the Battlefront 2 life cycle, and I think that's when this community started to really fall in love with Battlefront, and that's when the head was cut off of the snake, and we were all left feeling kind of abandoned. And I think that is the solution right there, is do it right from the beginning, do it in a way that is that complete vision from the forefront, but also has promised to build later on and give us all a reason to keep coming back for more.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, it really feels like we have a lot of unfinished business with the way that Battlefront 2 was handled at the end, because to be honest with you guys, Battlefront 2 was on a roll. Like, they were really rolling along. DICE had really figured out something that worked for them with that game, and we were getting such great content with the Obi-Wan and Anakin and Grievous and Dooku editions and Geonosis and Felucia. Like, it was great. We were rolling. We were so excited to see what was going to come. Hey, are we going to get Ahsoka and Mustafar and Coruscant? Like, think about all of the content that did not get added to that game beyond just like the Disney Plus and Disney projects. Think about all of the core Star Wars content that never made it into Battlefront. The core planets. Coruscant is not in Battlefront 2. Padme, Mace Windu, like main characters did not make their way into that game. That game really was kneecapped before it was finished. And they can say, hey, we completed their vision, but nobody believes that. That's really not the case when it comes to that. And it kind of feels like there's unfinished business for the devs. There's unfinished business for us, the consumers, for Star Wars as a whole, for the community as a whole. It just feels like there's this vacuum that needs to be filled. And I think a game like a brand new Battlefront does exactly that. And then the last thing I want to say before we get out of here, Andreas, I'll turn it back over to you, is I think a game like a new Battlefront, a new multiplayer experience on the level of a Battlefront, would solve what I see when we talk around with the community and look around a lot of the problems that people have with the current state of Star Wars gaming. And that is the inconsistency of it, the clear lack of a roadmap of kind of what's going on, like what projects are coming, are projects coming? We're kind of in the dark with stuff like that, how long it takes to get a new Star Wars game. A multiplayer game like this would fill in that space, that empty space. It would be a great way to hold people over. It's a great complementary piece. While I'm waiting for Star Wars Outlaws, imagine if we had a Battlefront game right now. Like, we could play. Like, we would have a Star Wars game that is alive, that's getting new content, that feels like it's always evolving and getting fresh new stuff. I think that would make the wait for a game like Star Wars Outlaws or the Respawn FPS down the road feel a lot less shorter and a lot less daunting, and a lot, that cloud wouldn't be hanging over our heads. We would have something in the interim. I really think an experience like this would solve a lot of the problems that people have with Star Wars gaming as a whole. So I don't know. What do you think, Andreas? Or is this going to solve our problems? Is this the biggest problem, or are we kind of overselling what we think multiplayer would do for Star Wars?
Nick, for me, I personally do think that this is the biggest problem right now, because I have so much faith in the developers that are currently working with the Star Wars IP to deliver capstone single-player experiences in the gaming space. I know they will execute. What I do not have faith in is that I will ever have that feeling of a communal experience in a Star Wars game that continues to live post-release ever again, and I don't like having that feeling. I really do miss the days where we had a fallback game, I'll call it, like something safe to go back to in between releases. When we're in a period like this where we're in the dark, there was always Battlefront to fall back on. And right now, if you go back to Battlefront 2, it's still great, but there's no real point to it. There's nothing new. We're all level capped, and I really do think that I feel stuck in that regard. And I'm wondering how many of you watching this video feel the same way like I do, and I'm sure like Nick does, because this is certainly a feeling that I miss. I really do miss having that place to go to live out Star Wars in a way that is fun, that is in the new. Whenever there's new Star Wars content, they were always updating it, and I really would like to have that again. So one thing I'd like to ask everyone watching this video, well, first of all, if you're someone watching this video and you just don't want a multiplayer game to begin with, then there's nothing I can do to convince you otherwise. You don't like multiplayer games. I don't think this video or this game, frankly, would be for you. But if you are someone who really does want a multiplayer experience, I'd love to know what you're looking for. Are you looking for something like Battlefront 2 just to keep going in perpetuity and keep updating and giving us a reason to come back, touching on more of the tangential and tertiary topics of Star Wars? Or are you looking for something entirely different, like maybe an open world multiplayer experience, like a GTA Online, but Star Wars? I'd really be curious to know what you are all looking for in a multiplayer Star Wars game, because for me, I know I would love to see Battlefront return in a way that just keeps going and keeps giving me a reason to love Star Wars and play in the Star Wars universe. And I know you feel the same, right, Nick?
Honestly, like, the point of this video, dude, is just I want Battlefront back. I want a new Battlefront game. Like, that's what I want. I know we're saying, like, hey, we want a multiplayer Star Wars game, and what we mean is we want Battlefront back. We want a new Battlefront game. That too, it's like a perfect multiplayer experience in the Star Wars universe. Like, it's perfect. That's what we want. So that's kind of a call to action, I guess, from us is, please, gods that be in the gaming sphere, find a way to make this happen, please. Like, it's what the community wants. Just please find a way. Anyway, guys, like Andreas said, let us know your thoughts down below, you know, what you would want from a Star Wars multiplayer game. Is it as simple as just a brand new Battlefront game, or do you want a GTA-style open-world game like that? Let us know. I'm incredibly interested to hear what you have to say about that. And also, if you don't want a multiplayer game for Star Wars, I would just like to know why. Like, give us your thoughts down below. I would just like to read, like, why people only want single-player experiences. It's very interesting to me because I personally love both, and I know you do too, Andreas, so it's hard for me to imagine not liking both because I'm not one of those people. So just also let us know your thoughts down below about that. Anyway, guys, that is going to do it for us for this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, we will see you all next time.